Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Reason We Learn and Dissident Dispatch. I'm your host, Deb Philman. I'm so glad you're here this evening. I have a very special guest with me, Van Harvey, and we are going to dive into some talk about what makes public education inherently political. But before we get started, so we can give people a chance to arrive and get settled, I hope you have a nice cold beverage, maybe a little pad for taking notes. No, seriously, we're not going to be that formal, but you may hear something interesting. I would like to ask you to please like and share this broadcast so more people can take advantage of the information we're about to share. And make sure you're also following Van on X if you are on X. And he has a blog as well. Who is Van? Van Harvey is a father of three. He developed a particular interest in how the ideas and practices of education have transformed over time from the dawn of the West down to the present day. And he began blogging on educational issues in the early 2000s at Blogadidact. I guess this would be at Blogspot. Are you at Blogspot?
Yeah, Blogodidact. It was me trying to get cute between blog and Autodidact, which is what I
I got
was
it. So it's
doing at the time.
Blogodidact. I got it, not
Yeah,
Blog Addict. I was like
yeah.
Blogodidact. I
It's
read it
better. So I
wrong.
didn't think about having to type it. It's like, ooh, or
It's all
say it.
right. So Blogodidact, like autodidact. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So you were an early and active member of the St. Louis Tea Party in 2009. Go you. You became involved in efforts against Common Core. Again, bless you. Thank you. And beginning in 2014, served for years as one of the selections of the Missouri Speaker of the House for History, grades 6 through 12 working group, rewriting Missouri's curriculum framework. So it's just a very brief intro to his bio. You can learn more on his blog. But I want to spend most of our time talking. Before we get started, do you have a hard stop, Van? Do you have any time you have to be out of here? Let me
No,
know. No?
no.
All right. Hey,
I
guys.
shoveled down dinner before we came on.
So we are so lucky. All right. Awesome. So why did I invite you here for this Dissident Dispatch? Well, first of all, those who follow me and watch Dissident Dispatch each week know that this is where I get a little spicier, meaning, I'm a dissident. I disagree with, mainstream ideas on a lot of things to do with education, both on left and right. It's not always me disagreeing with the left. There are some things on the right that I'm not really in agreement with when it comes to education. And this is the show where I either bring people some news and dive into it and analyze it a little bit from a sort of dissident perspective, or I bring them a guest, such as yourself, to help me do that, to help me go into some concepts or ideas that are outside the mainstream, like outside what people might typically hear. And when I discovered you, it was because I was following Christine, who is known as the Palmer Worm on X, and she also has, I believe, a Substack. And if you're not already following the Palmer Worm, you need to be, because she is doing a deep dive analysis of the origins of our problem, mostly philosophical, but also tactical. How we got here tactically, and she does the heavy lifting in terms of the reading of all the foundational texts. So she was referencing you in some of your essays. I then started reading what you were writing and what you were saying, and I thought, this is the man after my own heart. You get it. You understand where I'm coming from. And yet, what I liked about your approach is that you're not pedantic. And unfortunately, I'm accused of that sometimes. I'm accused of sometimes just being like, if you don't do this, and I don't want to be like that. I want the audience to understand that when it comes to education, especially you're talking about your kids, this is really important. And I understand that you're in a bind. So, Van, how do you explain to people? Because I've tried to explain that public education is by nature political. How would you explain that to somebody if someone said, "Hey, that woman Deb Philman said that no matter what I'm going to get out of education that touches the government, it's going to be political." Why does she say that? What would you say?
Um, because it necessarily has to be. If it's coming from the government, from the public, it has to at least attempt to represent the views of the people it's teaching to. So right away, you've got people deciding on, okay, this point is important, this one not so much. Someone else says, yes, it is. So they take a little part of it and insert it in there, and it wedges in, and people can agree on this and that, and they say, okay, there you go. There's your, that's what we're going to teach. Whereas if you went to someone who really understood the subject, they probably would not put most of that in there or would present it in a completely different way. So you're having the decisions made on what the curriculum is going to be, how it's going to be presented, how much time is going to be given to it, being decided in a political process. And then someone else has to go and try to teach what they've been given to in as best manner they can, which is probably a conflict itself. So even the teacher is presenting information from a political mindset rather than from, this is something I understand very well and I want you to learn this and be better for it. So right from the get-go, it's in politics. And that was instantly how we got into the situation, and the immediate results found back early 1800s, even
Right.
before Massachusetts got their system going. It was a political debate.
Right. That's something most people don't know. So in other words, what I run into a lot um, are people who believe we either always had compulsory public education going back to the very beginning. And they might even say, well,
Mhm.
didn't Benjamin Franklin support public education? And didn't our founders think that it was a great idea for people to have an education to be able to vote and things? And can you explain? I mean, the answer to that is yes and no. I mean, right? But can you explain
Right.
where they're going wrong there?
Um, well, in the most immediate way, I suppose that maybe people get it is that you can ask them, what was James Madison's GPA? What did he graduate as? What what kind of grades did he get in which subjects? And if you went back and asked James Madison, I was like, what? GPA? That's not a word. What are you talking about? They didn't have grades. They didn't have particular subjects. They didn't go to a schoolhouse and move from room to room to room to study these things. It didn't have written tests. So everything that we're talking about as um, getting good grades, get a good job, that was an alien idea.
Right. But does that mean that only, rich plantation owners could read and do math and things like that? I mean, and, you're talking about James Madison, Van, you're talking about somebody who was a, well-to-do one of the framers of the Constitution. I mean, surely all those farmers were illiterate, right?
Except for the ones that they wrote the Federalist Papers to appeal to and get them to support and vote for adopting the
Right.
Constitution.
Right.
So yeah, no, it was a common thing. The idea of going to get an education so you could get a good job was not something that anyone did. Um, Someone who wanted to be a lawyer would want to be well educated and understand rhetoric and how to assemble an idea and reference it to principles it depends on. But we didn't even have law school. We had college for the people who really um, understood the basics very well and wanted to go further with it.
Well, mostly
They
we
went
had
to
them
college.
to train ministers. Each of the
Yeah,
original
yeah,
colleges were set up by a particular church or denomination and primarily for the purpose of producing people well read in the classics and the Bible.
yeah. Um, Thomas Jefferson's mentor when he went into law, which he went into as an apprentice. He was regarded as like the most well-read person in the colonies. He never went to school. He was taught Greek and Latin by his mom in the backwoods. That was a common thing. It was of interest. It was of importance to your life to be able to live your life better. It wasn't a thing to show, hey, I got a diploma here. They didn't have it. That came
Right.
along later. Um, yeah.
So then, fast forward to 1836 and we're in Massachusetts and they set up a school. They set up schools. The people must have been happy about it, right? I mean, now you've got some immigrants coming in. I mean, it's pre-Civil War, but still more immigrants than before.
Mhm.
And people were thrilled, weren't they, that the state was providing a schoolhouse and an education for their children, or no?
People who were thrilled about it to begin with had in mind the education that they had all been receiving, some form, and there was no monolithic style. I mean, it was done in many different ways, but they had a grasp of what they wanted by education. What they got was a complete um, restructuring, representing of not only education, but of their society and how it was going to operate. Within 3 years, there was a fellow, I think his last name was Dodge, one of the representatives in Massachusetts, who led a report and a widespread effort to repeal the entire educational system that they had just set up because they saw it as being can't think of the exact words off the top of my head, but as basically a threat to the democratical process that they had set up. Everything that was America was based on. They saw it as a Prussian import that was taking political control over them rather than delivering an education to their kids.
Right.
And tried their darndest to repeal it. Sadly, they didn't succeed.
Right. And a lot of Americans, I grew up in New York City or the New York City area and then Manhattan, uh look at one of the key figures in that whole thing, Horace Mann, as a big hero. There's even a private
Yeah.
school in New York City called Horace Mann. And I remember when we moved from New Jersey to Manhattan, my dad said, "You're going to private school." I'd gone to public school. I said, "Well, now you're going to private school." Never really explained why, but I kind of like I was about 13 years old. I kind of filtered it through, what his tone and that something's wrong with public school. But like the way he's talking, I don't know what it is. And I had just been in public school and I didn't really like it, but I had a couple good teachers. It wasn't as miserable as today. Okay. It wasn't great. I saw school as kind of this drudgery you had to go through, right?
Yeah.
But then hearing him talk about, well, you have to pick a private school, I was kind of like, have to implies something's wrong with the others. So his first choice, he said, "I'd really like you to be able to go to." He had two choices. One was Fieldston, and one was Horace Mann. And I now know, looking back, these are two of the most progressive, liberal. I don't think he knew that. Okay. I think
Hmm.
he just looked at what do people say is the best? Like, what
Right.
are, my peers and different people who's an attorney, where are my partner's kids going, whatever. And I don't think he really understood, even at that time, 1979, how political it already was. And even to this day, if you say Horace Mann to some people, not just the school, but the person, it's like, oh,
Mhm.
oh, same with John Dewey. Oh,
Yeah.
what oh my goodness. The father of so important, amazing. And it when I say them, monsters, not good people, they look at me like I have two heads.
Yeah.
What do they not know about Mr. Horace Mann?
Um, Among the many firsts that Horseman did was he was the first to import the Prussian system of approach to education. He's the first
Okay.
one to import written tests he saw those, and when he took a trip to Germany, which unfortunately most Americans were doing at the time, he just thought that was wonderful. So he got written tests, meaning that how it had been done, the teacher would have an oral examination with a child in the class, and they would go back and forth and find out what they knew and understood and what they didn't, and other kids would, chime in and so forth. Written tests meant you have a written question, single question. You have a expected answer, even if it was at that time, some of it was sort of essayish. There was something that you could be corralled with. He had a way of being able to take those tests and collect data about it, data that let him know what the teacher was teaching, what the parents were accepting, what the kids were getting. He found a way to use that to mark it with grade levels. That was data that could be mined and manipulated to get political control over what was being taught in the school, getting rid of teachers who didn't teach the way he wanted it. Everything he went about doing was to have political control and create a new, more ideal student for America.
And why? Why did he want that? Like, what ideas was he in service to?
He was very much a believer in what would become, wasn't quite yet there, but what would become the progressive movement, where that would be child-centered, and you could develop a set of attitudes that would be perfect for society. So there was a guy, Fichte, pronunciations, who knows where I'm off on that. But he set up some addresses to the German people. He was just stunned by Napoleon. Came through, blew through the Germans and Prussians and wiped them out. And he gave it some thought, and he decided that the reason why Germany failed was because people thought too much. And so he decided, oh, I see what we need to do now. What we need to do is get them in the classroom, drill them in the correct answers to every situation so they won't think. They'll just know what the experts think they should do.
Oh, that sounds familiar this week.
Yeah.
Experts.
Yeah, it does. Chevron.
How will we know what to do if the
Yeah.
experts aren't telling us? Oh my goodness, how dare the Supreme Court take that away from us, even though it's only, I graduated from high school in 83 and I'm laughing at these people. You do realize we had the country for quite a while before this.
Yeah.
And it was already pretty bad. They already had too many FDR experts still left over. So, so Horace Mann, okay, there you go. I just wanted to show y'all, some of the stuff. But Horace Mann, not by my estimation, and it sounds like yours as well, not a good person if your definition of good is someone who put preserving individual liberty at the forefront of any educational effort. In other words, okay, we're going to organize it and have, multiple children together in one building, and we're going to, facilitate the process of people accessing knowledge like James Madison did or whatever. But essentially it's going to be the same stuff, because what the project we want to work on is to make sure that each and every individual American is self-reliant and can think on their own and be in charge of their own destiny, and all the ideas that many of us thought were sort of captured in our Declaration and our Constitution and the Federalist Papers. Somebody sort of Lockean, right? Not Hobbesian. And so that's not at all what he was interested in. He was more interested in taking us back to old world authoritarian. These people know what you should know and what you should think, and you don't. Mom and dad, kids, even teachers. And I'm going to data mine you. It wasn't called data mining, but I'm going to data mine you as I feed you the tidbits of nourishment I think you need. See how you react to it. If it's not really working very well, I'm going to old-fashioned 1800s adaptive learning. I'm going to give
Yeah.
you something different to, he didn't even know he was a behaviorist. And he was a behaviorist. Like Skinner would have loved him. But so I don't think of him as a good person, because anybody who approaches other humans in the world of me with with a mindset of how do I control these people?
Mm-hmm.
How do I make sure they do my bidding or what I would want them to do is not a good person.
They had the idea, and it was just coming in with utilitarianism was the main umbrella for it. That rather than these old-fashioned ideas, already then 1830s old-fashioned ideas of um, wisdom and virtue and good habits, so forth. They had the idea that you could produce as many effects that would serve the greater good, then that was good. And therefore, literally, your ends justified the means. That greater good you're aiming at was more important than any piddly person who might want to obstruct things and throw sand in the gears and so forth. And they very much justified it along those lines. And it came out, I really began to see it with Rousseau and filtered down into Kant and Fichte and Hegel and spilled over onto us. But is that idea that what was good was a very different thing from what was considered the good of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That was something silly and old-fashioned that you couldn't quantify or measure. Whereas if we could have a number of people hitting these grade point averages, then we can see that they know what needs to be known. And we know that that's the good stuff because our experts have decided that's good. So that's what we need to target. And that kind of mindset drove forward and drove on. And it didn't just start at that. I mean, some very good people like Noah Webster, the dictionary guy, Dr. Benjamin Rush, they were very much for this idea of getting away from the way that they learned because they thought they could quantify, they can make it faster, more efficient. Webster had the idea that he didn't like learning Cicero's speeches and things. He knew them. He could speak the language. He could write in Latin and Greek and understood it, but he didn't like learning that. So he figured, well, most other people probably wouldn't either and be more efficient if we could just tell them what they did. And then that would be enough, and then they could go off and have their lives and reference these things as needed. In the meantime, we get them out into the business place and help build America and boost the economy and everything else. That was their line of thinking.
So they already had
There's
a pragmatic view of education.
yes, they were already getting that. Even while they were relying on the form of education that made them who they were, which was completely different from what they were sending their kids and grandkids into, which they didn't. Most of them did not realize it. Horace Mann, I have a real hard time giving him grace on the subject, but I think most people, they were. If you read the debates, and how they were doing, most of the good chunk of the people were ministers from whichever persuasion, arguing that we need to, get more of this in there, more of that in there, and it'd be better if we could get all our kids in here because there were new people coming to America. We need to have a standard. We need to know. We need to make America great first. And so that took immediately the focus off of the idea of the child being educated to be a informed, moral, self-governing person able to live, in liberty and society, into a creature for the economy and boost the standing of America.
Right.
So it was a different set of goals that they disconnected out of sight, out of mind, and didn't think about, which
Right.
we're reaping the negative consequences of.
Well, let's talk about some of those negative consequences, because I think sometimes when we start talking about it in this way and say
Mm.
that education went from something to improve your mind, to pursue truth, and just have at your disposal, not just the wisdom of the ages, but the ability and the know-how to make decisions about how to incorporate that wisdom into your own life as you saw fit, as opposed to someone else deciding this is important, that's not important. And as you point out, we'll tell you what Cicero did, but you don't get to read Cicero's own words. The danger there, of course, is you're trusting the person who's telling you what Cicero did to render that accurately, whereas getting it from the primary source is obviously
Right.
more accurate. And you're still trusting the book printer that he printed it accurately. So
Yeah.
there are all these layers, but there still will be people. I meet people to this day who say, I don't see the problem with that. I really don't, Deb. Life is long. If they want to go when they're working and they have a good job and they need to support themselves, and if they want to go back and read Cicero's speeches, they can have the time to do that. And that school is the kid's job, and school needs to prepare them to go out there and make a living and all this. So I do run into people who don't, when I say what Horace Mann was about and what he wanted, they're like, so what? Why do you have such a big problem with this? And I I struggle with trying to explain it, because when something is so self-evident to you, it tends to be harder for you to explain it to other people.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can help me with that, because I tend to believe that even if you are a pragmatist, I'm not, but let's say you are,
Mhm.
and this is America, you're free to be that way. Um, there's still something inherent in the design of the system and the way this is working that is still not giving you it's still trampling your freedom. So in other words, you may think you're aligned, you may think you want what they're offering you, but you're not really freely choosing that from all the options in the world that you could have, nor are
Mhm.
you choosing the the particular version of pragmatism that you might want for your child. Someone else has chosen it for you, but can you add to that? Can you help me out with that? Because I really want to help people understand why this decision to move towards this style of education was a net negative for everyone, even pragmatists.
Um, the Noah Webster, who had spent time as a school teacher, in thinking about, what would be his ideal school system to set up, he figured that he could um, functionally educate students with a good grasp of all they needed to know to be able to get out there and get out into the workforce, over 4 months a year, 5 or 6 years. So he figured they'd be fully educated and graduated by 13, 14 years old. Teaching as they still were at the time, that was not wild at all. That was normal. You understood how to read. You read deeply. You understood how to calculate. You understood where you were in the world, geography, everything else, well enough. Out of 4 months out of the year, for 5 or 6 years, boom, you're done, you're gone. So that child at that point understood everything they needed to know to be able to walk into any business, learn the ropes as an apprentice, which is how it was normally done, and boom, off they go, following their interests and becoming what they wanted to be in the world. What school rapidly developed into was first additional months per year. They've been trying to get it past the 9 month really been pushing that, especially the last 10 or 12 years. We'll see how it goes. And then from 5 or 6 years in a school to now we've got K to 12, and then you're expected to go off another 4 years to college and maybe another 4 after that to learn a job, a sliver of professional standing, which if some of us computer programmers develop a new application, your line of work could go poof. And then what are you going to do? You know nothing. You know nothing to be able to go out and understand what is important, understand how it all relates, and learn anything you want to. So what we've done with our school system, with our grades, are fed answers. What are the 12 causes of the Civil War? Well, A, B, C, D. Yes, you know what's going on. Off you go. That isn't an education. That will give you some answers that will please some people and allow you to do something and get a position to do these tasks that you've been trained in, don't understand, but you've been trained in them. That's a very different thing from someone who understands not only numerous subjects, but has a pretty good understanding of themselves and why they would want to be interested in these different things and be able to maybe start in one line of work and then understand how that relates to something else and switch gears and not have to jump back to some trade school to pick things up again. Or even more ideally, possibly, yeah, I'll go pick up a semester at a trade school and I'll be fine on that without any the fear of walking on thin ice that our current system instills in everybody.
Right.
Most
And
kids know. I knew when I was in school, and I was a terrible student. I knew that what I did know, this is silly. I don't understand any of this stuff.
well, and getting back to, the sort of the topic of the show about how it's inherently political, how does it benefit people in power when your actual knowledge is so narrow?
When you don't understand what is being pushed 2 or 3 levels under the marketing in the whether it's the newspaper or the politician, you are so easily manipulable. You are human capital that those who have a somewhat better grasp can use to further their own purposes and ends. Um, your good be damned.
Right. Well, I would say you have trouble figuring out what your good is.
Yeah.
It's
Or
yeah.
good. What is
Or
good?
good, yeah, good
Yeah,
period. You're
that's the
good.
question that doesn't come up.
And then what ends up happening is you get stuck in the perpetual now where you are pretty much focused on what do I want or what do I think benefits me today.
Mhm.
So long range thinking becomes nearly impossible because in order to engage in that kind of thinking, you have to have perspective from the past. You have to understand history. I did a show about memory holding history. If you don't
Mhm.
have historical perspective, and you don't know what, if anything, has already been tried to fix some of the problems of human existence that seem to linger or come back again and again, whether it's
Yeah.
war, poverty, disease, whatever it is, um, tribalism. How can you're starting fresh every time. You're having to reinvent the problem solving wheel. And that takes a lot of time, a lot of energy. And if you don't already have some knowledge to draw on, even about that,
Mhm.
it's very tempting to outsource that thinking.
Yeah.
The first person who comes along and says, I have the answer, here it is. And oh, by the way, I have these special letters after my name. That
Mhm.
represents a credential that says, I know more than you.
Right.
And you have no frame of reference to dispute it. You can't say, I, those letters don't mean anything real. I've read all these books. I love it when I see people online, like yourself or there are plenty of other people on the internet who are autodidacts, who have just read and read and read, and you find out they're a carpenter, or a plumber, or they're an electrician, or whatever.
Mhm.
And yet they've read so deeply, it might as well be James Madison or somebody. And along comes some PhD and spouts some nonsense. And then there's this self-taught person who just says, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah, you're just like,
It's my favorite thing. It's like I just sit back and I'm like, this is a thing of beauty, please more. Because they get away with it. They generally get away with it.
and
And
it becomes simpler all the time because everyone's, what they understand and know and care about is narrowed, aggressively narrowed, year
right,
after year after year by what they've
right.
been, taught.
Exactly. So I have a question from the audience from Saya Sophia, who has her own channel. If you're not familiar with her work, she's a climate scientist, and she'll cover sort of research studies. And I think we're going to work on one next week, about education topics. But her question is, we have a number of folks who insist that we listen to experts who are often specialists trained in a thing when crafting policy. Is the school system that we're describing causing this?
It is a motive force in that, yes. The school system was designed to funnel segments of the population into different areas of interest by those who were putting it together. There's a guy, my favorite. His name was Elwood P. Cubberley,
Oh, Cubberley.
back in the early 1900s. He's
Yes, I
pretty
remember
much the
him.
one. Yeah, he planned out the industrial design in the schools, the school districts, consolidating school districts under superintendencies and so forth. He had
Right.
a hand in creating standardized tests too. But he wrote in one of his books, the line is, and he's very, very just pleased to say this and state it. That every year the child is coming to belong more and more to the state and less to the parent. We're really doing a bang up job here. And
Yes.
that was the point. They were getting control of society, and they were directing society towards what they had decided was the good end that everything should be serving. That would be greater than, greater good than whatever piddling thing you might be worrying about.
Right.
And
And this
it narrows and divides your understanding. It creates narrow experts in this and that who can be very happy in their expertise next to another person who is an expert in a completely different field, and they have um, no meaningful way of interacting on anything other than current events.
right.
So they can be completely contradictory positions, and they won't know it.
Well, and they get very attached to defending that dependency.
Mhm.
So I've noticed that people seem to act scared if you challenge it. So rather than hearing, "Oh, you mean I'm free to think for myself?" Really? Like, I hadn't really thought about it, but now that you mention it, yeah, I'd rather be free to think my own thoughts and make my own decisions. I've seen people get enraged. Like, that would be terrible for society if everyone there also seems to be baked into the system an inherent message that you can't trust your fellow humans.
Mhm.
You need everyone to be ordered and grouped and labeled, and you won't be safe unless the experts tell people what to do, because left to be free, everyone will be bad. So they've started to
Yeah.
equate, or not started, this is from the beginning, I think. They've equated what you and I would call liberty with, you know, people just doing whatever they want, like hedonism, being a libertine, whatever.
Hmm.
They don't seem to have an understanding of what freedom itself is. And I did want to talk about that with you because you did such a brilliant job of explaining what choice is. And we're going to get into school choice in this show, just not at this moment. But I think it's important because when we talk about public schooling or any schooling that touches the government or public dollars, because it's really all the
Hmm.
same thing, being inherently political because it has to be because it's the public's money and because people are going to vote. I mean, people, if you take people's money and you make something compulsory, right? You make it compulsory. Like you must show up with your child by the time they're the age of X. Not just you must show up somewhere, but you must show up at this building right here in this zip code, in this state. And you must subject them to this many hours a day, this many days a year, et cetera, et cetera. And if you don't, you will be in trouble. I mean, you will be in, a truant and you might be, child might be taken away. All these things might happen to you. So there's the compulsory nature of the attendance. And then everything about every last little choice about what it is also decided for you. And yet I'll hear people saying, public education is a basic right. This is my right as an American to be forced to do a
Hmm.
bunch of stuff. And to me, it doesn't compute. When I hear that, my ears bleed. But I think it stems from a fundamental misunderstanding about what freedom and choice actually are. And I do think that the schools that Horace Mann and Dewey and everybody designed did it by design. They don't want us to know what it is. So can we go over that? What is freedom of choice? How do we define that?
If you are free to make a choice, number one, you understand that there is something, there's a reason for you making a decision between this and that. And if you're not really sure what your decision is, you learn more about it, more about the consequences and so forth. And at some point you decide that this, I think, is the best course of action for me. To do that, number one, you've got the freedom to think about it, um, to discuss with other people, uh, get other opinions, talk things over. I didn't think about it from that direction. And you can roll it around in your mind and make a decision. To do that, you're free to do it. No one is forcing you. They
You're
haven't
also
given you an
free
answer
to
that you're
not
compelled.
do it. You're also
Right.
free to not make a choice and say, I'm
Yeah.
not doing anything right now.
You're free to say that, you know what? I need to know more about this. I'm not ready yet. That is a very different thing from being told you're going to do this in this way with your child, and we'll expect various reports, cards, systems to prove that you did these things and got it
That would
done the
be
way we
force.
expect.
That would be
Yeah,
force. Okay,
that's
so freedom of
compelling you.
choices, I have the option to do it, not do it, think
Yeah.
about it, consider all the possible ramifications of each option that is available to
Make a
me.
choice. You've got to be free from any imposition of force, uh, compulsion to do this or that, and you're able to say no.
Right.
You lose that right off the bat under a compulsory education system.
Right. So
So,
even the choices we make within that, you make the point in your article, which again, I can't recommend this enough. I'm going to drop it in the chat for y'all so you can read it at your leisure. But you really, really need to read this article. In my personal opinion, it's not short, but it's very, very thorough, and you will understand so much more when you read it. But you made the clear distinction between uh freedom of choice and involuntary
mm,
action. And this is the one I think that's missing from people's minds. So I think once you start talking about freedom of choice, we go, yeah, that makes sense. I get that's what freedom of choice. I just hadn't really thought about it, but you're right. You got to be free of compulsion, and then force is the compulsion. But what they don't realize is where the freedom of choice begins. And they think it begins, like for me, I'm choosing to homeschool. Not really. I mean, yes, but it's an involuntary thing in the sense that I still had to pay my money. They still took my money away to educate other kids. So that's gone. They are still regulating me. Now I'm in a state that isn't regulating me quite as much as some other states, but it's still got some regulations. I still have to let them know what I'm doing. I'm supposed to have on file a standardized test at the end of every year. In theory, they could check up on me. I have to have so many days of school a year, so many hours, and so on. And so I'm not really free, right? I can't just
It's the
take a year off.
it's the Godfather thing that I'm going to make you an offer you can refuse. That's not offering you a choice. That's
Right.
a threat that you have to pick it, and it's not less of a threat if he says, "I'm going to make you a bunch of offers that you can't refuse." It's the same damn thing. You are being compelled to to choose choose between options that are going to be bad or worse for
Right.
you.
And
The idea of a
by
good choice
certain
is no
dates.
longer on the table.
Right. And they've been so successful over the last 150 years or whatever. It's longer at this point.
Yeah,
Persuading the American people down through the generations that this is not only, right and proper, but actually beneficial. That even when I work with parents who say, "Oh, my local public school is terrible. I want to leave. I'm going to homeschool my kids," they immediately start constraining themselves and saying things like, "Okay, so my child is 3. How do I make sure they're reading by 5? And
yeah,
how do I make sure that they know how to do this by 7? And how do I make sure that we're meeting the state standards? And we've got to choose a curriculum." And I'm like, "Oh my God, this is so frightening that even when somebody says, I'm not going to go do the specific thing the government says, I'm going to strike out on my own," but then they're still like not free from their chains. It's
yeah,
like the dog that, is on the leash or whatever, but you give them a little more rope and they're like, "Yay, I'm free." Like, no, you're not. You're
yeah,
still on a leash. So that's been challenging for me to explain to people that these choices that they think they have are really just they're making under duress.
yeah. The public education system is more of a vehicle for the educational system that is common, the establishment educational system, which is common across public schools, most private schools, church schools too, and not a few of the homeschool platforms that are out there. So
Right.
it's a way of following the experts um, while appearing to not be tied to them. You're
Right.
still dancing to that same tune, and
Well,
it doesn't have your education in mind
no. And
as you being able to hit certain ratings so that you can be routed into the whichever way human capital is needed at that moment. But it's not about education, and that's a difficult thing to get across to
right.
people. That
And I love some of your statements that you made, where you said, firstly, how you decide to respond to an unjust use of force is not a choice freely made. Your
right,
response to a mugger demanding your money or your life is a decision made under duress in which you calculate how best to act because you've been unjustly forced into a situation that there is no justification for. And the tragedy I see is parents recognize the first half of that sentence, but not the second. In other
mhm,
words, they recognize they've been forced into a situation that they're not happy with, but they don't recognize how unjust it is. And
mhm,
that's the part that I'm trying to explain to them is why it is unjust. Why would you say that it is unjust in the United States of America? I personally think it's unconstitutional, but people say, "Well, it's been decided it is constitutional because precedent." But
no,
I
it
think
hasn't.
differently.
Yeah.
So,
Um,
why is it unjust what they're doing?
that the system in every state in the Union, and it has been since the early 1900s, and Alaska and Hawaii right along with it, is under some set of compulsory education laws. So the decision was made at the legislature level that because there may be some bad parents out there who won't educate their kids, we're going to presume that everyone could potentially be one of these bad parents. And we're going to force everyone to get the education that they should have, that society needs and we all know is very important. So right off the bat, everybody in that state, in all 50 states now, is forced to go get an education. The education that is defined by the legislators, that is designated how they're going to check and make sure that you understand the things that they think is important, the schedule you're going to do it on, where you're going to do it on, and so forth. And the thing that um, I think got across to me when I brought it up in a group was, okay, everyone values your child more than anything else.
Right.
And I thought, well, yeah. Say, and so if I offered you, a new car, trade for your child, would you go for that? And you're like, no.
Right.
Yeah, okay. Well, how about a house? Would you go for a house? No. I can get you a really good job if you trade your child away. Get away from me. What are you talking about? And you go down the line on this, and every aspect of what they value in life, they've given over to the laws to tell them what you're going to, what your child is going to do, what's going to be covered in their thoughts, what choices they can make, what their interests will be. And we signed over all of these things in every area of our life. And that system was what was put in place early 1900s, where it was kind of solidified everywhere. And that frame of mind from the legislator's point of view, we have a greater good that we can compel everyone to go along with. That has become the template for everything that's done. That's how we've now got, we've got the FDA, we've got the FCC, all the different areas is just taking that same template of a principle of force and tweaking it to every area. So if you say that this is not does not have ramifications outside of the classroom,
Right.
no, your entire life is being affected by this and has been for well over a century.
Right. And then Ryan Crabtree says violates innocent until proven guilty, assumes guilt, but
Yes, it does.
bypasses the separation of powers. The legislature bypasses the court. The court abdicates its responsibility by assuming the legislation legal. I couldn't agree more. And trying to explain this to people who've been poorly educated in their rights, obviously it gets harder every year. And then Aquinas says, what would constitute true expansion of liberty and education for you? Like, what would your opinion? I'll give mine when you're done.
Immediate end of compulsory education. That's the necessary starting point.
Compulsory education delende est, as
you
said.
And I know all my friends of mine that can speak Latin, which I cannot, have contacted me and say, "Oh, that's the wrong way to say it. I don't know Latin."
Okay, neither do I. So we're culturally appropriating ancient culture to say what we want.
Delende est works for compulsory education too.
Sure. So he says that's the end goal. No. Yes, I
think it's less a goal as a starting point. You really are not making a decision to educate your child when you are being compelled to do it in a particular way. So it's not an end goal, it's a starting point.
So your
And
starting point is ending the compulsory nature of it.
yeah,
And that includes the compulsory funding of it, I would imagine, as well? Or just the compulsory attendance? Because if you have to fund it, but you don't have to show up, I mean, that seems kinda weird.
Eh, you could, I'm sure you could make many compelling, reasonable, practical arguments for saying, well, we got to phase this out and phase that out.
Yeah,
Say, yeah, yeah, okay, fine, I see that. But you still have not actually done anything until the whole ball of wax is out of the way.
right. I just don't know, I'll be honest, I think if you led with ending the compulsory nature, you'd have a
Mhm.
very tiny percentage of people who would not show up unless they were keeping their money. They'd still
Yeah.
go or they'd still find somewhere to try to get the money. So then he asks, he meant but what is the expansion on the way to there? And of course, the most popular current thing, and we might as well get to it, it's the elephant in the room,
Mhm.
is school choice, so-called, trademark, whatever.
Yeah.
And, the we'll go into I wanna go into each of the sort of arguments for it. I also wanna show your layered depiction of the people who are for it, because I think it's very important. There are probably people in the audience who fit in at least the
Mhm.
bottom 2 layers. I don't know about the top. I don't think they watch me. I think they're busy figuring out how to marginalize and silence me. But,
Yeah.
the so they describe it, I would agree it is an expansion of something. I just don't know that it's an expansion of liberty or expansion of liberty and education. I think it is an expansion of education, the system. I think it is an expansion of government's reach
Mhm.
into uh currently more private forms or modalities of education, but I don't see it as an expansion of liberty. And I'm wondering what you think of that. We'll stay to the high level of the idea of
Mhm.
taking money, and we'll get into the micro of what form, but just money from the public purse and
Mhm.
distributing it to parents and saying, "Okay, now you can take it to private sources." My argument is that's still exposed to the political process, so you're actually expanding government's reach, not your liberty. And you say what?
Um, well, yes. Well, number one, I think what needs to be understood, I got into this part of it because I've been I've been off Twitter for quite some time. I started kind of coming back to it in spurts after Elon bought it. And then I noticed all of a sudden all my friends from Tea Party days are just ripping into each other. I'm like, what the heck? And it was
Right.
over school choice. And well, you're just a monopolist for education, or you're a wackadoodle, or whatever the different thing was.
I was called
So how can
dangerous.
this be
I was
happening?
called dangerous.
Oh, yep, in that. And I think immediately when you are separated from a principled position, understanding of what you're doing and why you're making your decisions, when
Right.
that's cut off, all you have left are various fragments of things. The root is gone. You've just got these things that goes backwards. You got these different interests. So you can have an economic interest, you can have a business minded interest, you can have a I want my kid to excel interest, and you have good grades and all those things. Those are isolated, separate interests that people are kind of coalescing around. And some people are looking, you know, down the road saying, well, what you're doing is, you're giving government more power. And I lean in that direction. But then again, when the people who are quote unquote on my side say we got to defeat this school choice bill because the government will grow big, it's like the government is growing bigger and bigger and bigger, and you're defeating the school choice bill is not going to stop that. You need to understand that being given the impression that you have struck a blow for the cause is
Right.
not what's happening there.
Right.
And it's important to realize who the people on the other side of this choice, who are on your side,
Right.
what the problem is that they're seeing. And it breaks out the ones who are for school choice. You've got the uninformed majority who look at it as being just a matter of, I want dollars to fall in my kid's backpack. That just makes sense to me. It seems obviously a free choice. That's a good idea. And then you've got the contentedly misled, which I think are more of the activists and legislators who have a better understanding of what's going on under the surface, but there's an attraction to a certain plausible deniability that they can go along so far
Mhm.
and without plunging into the depths of the matter and push their agenda, which is part of that. And then there's the misinforming, the misleading, the ones who know exactly what's going on and are making decisions, pushing positions that they know are misleading people,
Right.
but it is serving their agenda well, and so going along with it.
Right.
But if you're looking at it as, okay, an informed majority as a free choice, how is this possible? We want, free market and education. Um, I can go off in 3 different
Well,
directions on here,
well,
and
why
it's
don't we
it's
talk about it? Why don't we talk about each of these layers? Like, so for example, in your article, you
Mhm,
emphasize that and this is a fact. I don't even think it's pragmatism. I think it's just acceptance of reality, observance of reality, which is the system is so massive and every state has a constitutional amendment, requiring it to
right,
exist and all the contracts and all the things. I mean, unraveling that is not something you're going to do by voting for one governor or one president or anything. So it's there, it exists. And you make a couple of key points that I think are valid. One is we all have to remain engaged with it
mhm,
as citizens because we are paying the taxes that support it and we have to hold them accountable. So we must be more engaged than we have been, whether that means, paying very close attention to what your school board is doing, to budgets, to ideology, to any cuts you can push them to make, to, who you vote for and what their
mhm,
stance is. We cannot, even if you decide to go and take a form of school choice and leave. And just like I've left with the homeschooling, I'm still paying very close attention to like what are they doing. So that's the first thing that it exists. We have to do that. Second thing, that is not a bad thing. You're not doing something wrong or immoral or anything to remove your child from a bad
right,
school, from a bad situation. So if you find yourself in a situation, and this I agree with, I want to make very clear to my audience. I think I've said it before, but I want to be very clear. If you look at your personal situation and you say, homeschooling is not in the cards for me, doing without the money is
mhm,
not in the cards for me. In other words, I can't take a absolute firm principled stand and leave my money on the table and go off and just do completely private schooling
yeah,
off the grid, so to speak. Um, I really need this voucher ESA, but because I got to get my kid out of this unsafe situation or into a situation where they're going to get
yeah,
better. Now, they only have one childhood. I respect that. I understand you have to do it. That said, and you make this point as well, you must be aware that what you're doing is not a solution, it's a trade
right,
off. And so while it is an immediate escape from something arguably worse,
mhm,
it is not automatically better. No, in other words, just because it's private doesn't mean take your eye off the ball all is well now. You still have to
right,
pay very close attention. And on this channel, I've covered us. Some of the private schools are even worse, like in terms of
yeah,
lack of accountability, strange
absolutely,
contracts you have to sign, they're woke, whatever. So you still have to be very careful that you're not just jumping from the frying pan into the fire. And then on top of that, you got to look backwards because you're still part of that political process that not only is keeping that system alive and the longer and as it exists, it changes the market for education across the board. I
yeah,
don't like that our children are products, but they are.
mhm,
Smell the coffee. They are, even if you move to another school, the market for education is monopolized by the government's tax position, compulsory or coercive tax policy. So,
Yeah.
so you've got to keep your eye on that ball while having your kid in the other school and watching that school. And you've got to be fighting for what is the perfect. People say, don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. And I'm like, but if you recognize there is a perfect and you abandon it, you just say like, don't make the enemy of the good. I'm like, okay, but don't leave it by the side of the road either.
Yeah.
What are you going to do to keep advocating for it? So, let's say I was in that position reading your article, I'm picturing myself in this situation. What if I took it, went to a local private school? What would be my next step? Well, my next step would be saying, I'm doing this under duress. First of all, recognize you're making a choice under duress. This is not yippee,
Right.
I get money and everything's wonderful. You are making a choice under duress. It is an involuntary choice. Second thing, it is far from perfect. Perfect would be you never spent the money in the first place and you're free to do what you want, no compulsion. And you got to keep demanding what that thing is.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's
That like a correct
important.
assessment of what you would say too?
Yeah. It's important that you understand what the principled position is and what it is not, and what you are having to do because you do not have a choice in the matter except to choose between bad and worse. And you're
Right.
making that selection because it is less bad for you and your kids.
Right.
That's a very different thing from the mindset of, oh, I just made a great choice for my child's future, or I'm doing something that's absolutely terrible and I can't forgive myself, but I'm doing it anyway. Both of those serve to reduce you, to put you in what you mentioned earlier, that kind of frame of mind where every disagreement is an attack.
Right.
We need to understand what the correct principled position is, and that we are operating within that. And especially, I think, for people on my side that would be opposed to school choice program in general, you can't tell these parents who are faced with the choice, I'm going to send my kid into this school, which is maybe bad education and maybe even unsafe, or I'm going to take this money so I can educate them at home or in a private school. You can't tell that parent, you're just sticking up with Bill Gates and the globalists. That's not helpful. It's not an argument. It's not a useful or valid
Right.
position, in no matter how that comes out.
I do tell these people in the little pointy part that though.
Yeah,
The people down in this little part of the triangle,
yeah,
yeah, I have words for them.
yeah.
But part of the reason I do is that I see them saying things about, speaking to the uninformed majority to
Mhm.
sell what they're selling. And I have called it snake
I,
oil.
I especially hit it on when they're saying, it's a free market choice. It's like there is, as far as I know, there's no definition of free market that includes the government setting up a vendor and supplying uh, compulsory customers to it,
Yep.
and deciding what all the breakouts as far as profits and losses are going to be and how it's going to be managed. There's no free market in that.
No.
I understand that it is a less bad option than something else for a number of parents, and I get that, but they really need to get out of the frame of mind that you are helping liberty by
Right.
going along with this. That's not the case.
No, and that's where I get pretty animated is when I hear the standard arguments are it's a free market solution. It will create competition. This is not what again, this isn't first of all, competition in and of itself is not magic, as you've pointed
Right.
out. And secondly, this isn't competition.
Yeah.
So, because again, you're not really competing when there are all these desperate customers who are compelled to choose you or someone else. And still, at least for the moment, get to choose them. Right?
Mhm.
Private schools, unless the government is going to get in the business of compelling the private schools to accept everyone who applies, in which case they're not private schools at all anymore.
Working there. Yeah.
Right? And so this is the thing. And no matter what, the other thing I noticed a lot of people in the uninformed majority forgetting is that just because these bills for these policies are primarily, well, I would say like 99% sponsored and supported by Republicans, in other words, one political party,
Mhm.
does not mean that every parent who takes advantage of the program once it's passed is going to agree with you about what the school you end up going to needs to be.
Yeah.
And because it is now funded with public dollars, at least in part, and it will be in large part at this point, right? Government
Mhm.
subsidies come in and it starts really swaying what
Yeah.
the recipient of the subsidies does. We've seen it in medical care, we saw it in the colleges. So now you go in there thinking this is going to be a rigorous program with more big books and classical stuff. And in come a bunch of people with vouchers who love SEL and Castle and who
Mhm.
want the DEI, and they think it's fantastic to have a gender corn in the sex ed or whatever. And unless the school is going to turn away people based on ideology, which is highly unlikely, okay, and they probably won't be able to accept any public dollars if they do that,
Right.
then you are going to be right back where you were. If your child's got to be in school for 13 years, you might be right back where you were in just a few years. And this time, harder to, I mean, I wouldn't say harder, but it's no easier to vote your way out of it. And you might say, well, I can take my voucher and go to a different school. Well, they're all going to be facing the same thing.
Yeah. And
So,
the even outside of this with the vouchers and so forth, the arguments I never got was, for charter schools. Okay, we're gonna put business-minded people into running these schools and gonna make things very efficient, and it's going to cost less, and there are gonna be better grades, and teachers are gonna get paid more, and it's gonna be good all around. What you're talking about is still the same educational poison, or if you want to put it in a less offensive phrase, a not so hot form of education with some bad ideas, and you're going to deliver that into your kids more efficiently and effectively than the substandard, poorly managed public schools. So I think one big thing that really needs to get into people's heads, right alongside of compulsory education Delenda has, is what the heck do you mean by education? That needs to be squared away first.
well,
Because
especially when, as Aquinas is pointing out, the uninformed majority still thinks that education is a right. They think they have a right to.
yeah,
So they think they have a right to this cash because when if you tell somebody you have a right, it means it can't be taken away from you. And they also think of it as a thing, as an
mhm,
actual tangible thing, that the dollars are buying me this thing. Rooms, books, teachers,
right,
all this service is owed to me because I live in the United States of America. And what they're forgetting is, first of all, education is something you take. It's not something you get.
right,
You can get a building to go to. You can get some books that are provided for you to read if you do. Again, math, but no one, it's not, children don't have a brain like a little hinge that you just open it up and like, let's pour it on in there every day and okay, we'll
yeah,
seal back up and send you on your way. So the student has there it's a relationship. There's two-way street here. The student has to take as well as they're given. And if they're not really permitted to take and ask and do, and they just have to receive, then it is, what is your right? I have a right to go sit in a building and be talked at. I have a right to go sit
mhm,
in a building and stare at a screen. I have a right to go be in this place for 8 hours a day. And that's what it's coming down to in a lot of schools. And I think a lot of parents falsely believe, like you said, what is an education? A lot of parents falsely believe that this is going to change if they change buildings or if they change teachers. It might for some, but it's not automatic because that's not what education is. It's not something someone gives to you.
The one thing you get to if you actually get some glimmerings of an education is that a right is not something that someone else provides you.
That's right.
It's removing restraints from your being able to take those actions that you deem
Right.
necessary uh, for whatever your motivations are.
And we would understand
And
that
yeah,
if we had had a free and proper
right.
education all along.
But when yeah,
But the
but
reason
when
so
you're
many
filling out
people,
true false questions and multiple choice questions and things like that,
yeah,
you are being filled with the type of thinking that has you thinking that education is a right that must be provided to you.
yes, exactly. So, in sort of in conclusion about the whole the belief about the choices that it's giving me my tax dollars back, and you made the point
Mhm.
that it's not offering money back to you.
Right.
It's packaging your tax dollars with dollars taxed at the public expense or a fair share, and I mean it's redistribution. Let's do
I
away
have
with.
not seen a single school choice offer that amounted to an exemption from taxes.
Right. They all
And
contain a provision. All the bills I've seen contain a provision for the establishment of a separate, either a contract to outsourced
yep,
company, or to create a separate department within the Department of Public Instruction or the Board of Education at the state level. So
yeah,
you're either growing the government in the literal sense with more bureaucrats to
mhm,
administer the program and monitor the program and oversee the program, or you're taking a percentage of those dollars that were meant for your child's education and paying some consultancy
yeah.
to handle the debit
It's
cards and whatever.
every school reform has ended up being a government growth policy,
Right.
and it has from the very beginning, and it
Right.
must continue that way because it's just the nature of it.
Well, that's what we
You're
started off the whole show saying
yeah,
that, if you make a law compelling people to do something, which already we've talked about, it already is so bizarre in the United States of America if
yeah,
you read the Constitution, but then you've already done that. And now it's kind of like when you put someone in prison, we're compelled to feed them, clothe them, provide them
mhm,
medical care, make sure you even provide them therapy if they're having a hard time. I mean, because their freedom to move around and do stuff, even though they did something wrong, ostensibly, that's why they're in prison. It's still we assume the responsibility for these people's lives. Well, guess what? If the government compels your, 6 through 18-year-old to be somewhere at its discretion all day for 9 months of the year, it then we the people also have to, assume the responsibility for that care.
yeah,
And so given that, then on top of that, we have this, we've got the compulsory collection of the funds to pay for it. I mean, Isabel Patterson had words about how crazy this whole idea was. And, the fact that we fell for it was pretty remarkable.
yeah,
But to call that a right is kind of ridiculous. And then to look at it and say, this is not going to self perpetuate. It's going to actually get smaller, or it's going to compete with itself, and one side's going to win. And, where in the history of ever have we seen the government shrink because it was competing with itself?
right,
I've never seen that. It's not even a
yeah.
competition, but I'm just like, you know, and then Ego Brain says, "Oh wait, that's not that one." She said, "Oh, where did it go?" She said, "Maybe the school should be teaching the law by Frederick Bastiat. They can learn the proper place of
Oh,
law." Yes.
that would be an interesting turn of events.
Can you imagine? First of all, I don't know how many of the students would actually be able to read it and understand it, but let's say they could. Let's say they could. That would turn things on their ear, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would.
Even if they just read John Locke and natural law. I mean,
Yeah,
so okay, so we've established that the uninformed majority, that would be most of you parents out there, And even some teachers are contemplating a career change into a school where you're not worried about getting beat up all day or whatever. We understand, and we want you to know that you're in an, you're it's prudent, as Van has said, to take advantage of these benefits because it's in your immediate self-interest. It's quite rational to do so.
While
The
knowing that
while
that
knowing, yeah,
there are bad consequences, but yes.
yeah, and you can't, you have to know what you're doing. It's kind of like taking a
Yeah.
drug with side effects.
Taking responsibility for what you can and owning up to it and doing the best with it you can.
Right.
Hopefully,
Otherwise, the
while
system could.
also supporting a more fundamental change down the
Right.
road.
Now, when it comes to uh when it comes to the political nature of it, the other fight I get from people is, well, I'll say, okay, so you're going to take advantage of the vouchers or ESAs, and you have to keep your eye on the ball and understand it's fundamentally still wrong what they're doing. And there are this little triangle down at the bottom. There are some self-interested people who are making bank off this. First of all,
Yeah.
they're going to gather your students' data. That's like gold. You don't know what's going to be done with it. They might be the first ones to try to push AI on your kids. Like, they're don't assume it's the best thing ever. It's just different at the moment, and
Yeah.
different doesn't necessarily mean better. um well, when I say that to people, they get sort of fussed about it because they they feel like if something is more private, that they'll have more say in it. Like, well, I'll have more say then. I'll be able to do more about it. And I think they're misinformed, first of all,
Mhm.
about what your actual rights are when you're in something that's even like pseudo private,
Yeah.
right? Versus truly public. This is one area, ironically, where in the public school, you have qualified immunity and all. There's,
Mhm.
sunshine laws that, will make
Right.
people have to show you what's going on. That's not necessarily the case in the privates. But also, I think people don't realize how much the politics will come into the private schools and sway what they teach and how they test. And can you explain to people how that happens, like hypothetically, how that would happen? So here's private school over here currently doesn't take any public money, but in suddenly come an influx of voucher students. They're accepting
Mhm.
vouchers. What does it mean that the government is allowing them to accept vouchers?
When they accept the vouchers are to deliver a um, a target curriculum, which invariably includes, at bare minimum, a particular set of tests that must be passed that check these boxes of things that the kid has learned. More often than not, it also includes a certain portion of the curriculum that must be taught to the kids that provides the information for checking those boxes.
Right.
It's supporting the groups who are promoting that, whether it's social emotional learning, CASEL, things like that. So all of that the private school had been ignoring, if they're going to take these kids with these vouchers, that comes in the door. And that is also going to be, they're not putting these kids in small cubicles and teaching them one-on-one with a teacher. All the other kids in that private school is also going to be exposed to this new strain of the curriculum and testing focus. So
Right.
it's not something that is without harm to, you are helping spread a little bit of the virus
Right.
into the private school
Well,
system.
because what gets tested gets taught. People need to
Yes,
understand that because they want to continue to be able to take the vouchers, they have to achieve at a certain level with the tests.
right.
And that means they're going to put a little more pressure on their teachers to teach to those tests to make sure that their
Hmm.
students do pass those tests. If that requires a shift in the curriculum itself, and either getting rid of some things or adding some other things. They'll do it to get to that money. Now, you mentioned in your article what happened to Hillsdale College
Yeah.
when they accepted some government money. Tell the
And
audience what happened.
that's a big part of all of these school choice proposals that go through is the initial slapback is there's nothing in this bill that says your kids are going to have to do that. And they all leave out yet. And that's what Hillsdale found out. They first started accepting students who had government funding for their tuitions and so forth. As they went down the line a year or two, then suddenly the Department of Education said, hey, we're going to need you to be doing a little bit more of this and reporting some of this, and we need some more information of what's going on there. And Hillsdale said, well, wait a minute, we're a private school, and Chevron, the Department of Education said, no, you accepted our funding. With the shekels come the shackles. And Hillsdale fought it, and it was a long, expensive battle, and they lost. The government said, no, if you take a dime from the kids who are taking a dime from us, you follow by our rules.
Right.
And Hillsdale, I said, okay, we're done with that. We're no longer accepting students with public grants of any kind.
Right.
But that was a big hit on their part, and it was pretty impressive that they actually did it. But that is what happens, and every one of these, no matter how appealingly it's stated to begin with in the law and the proposal, it will be tweaked. Most of the bills say something like State Department of Education will see to it that this is carried out in acceptable manner. That means that the bureaucrats and the Department of Education of your friendly local state is going to start making demands and expectations and requiring reports and setting standards that have to be followed. And
Right.
that can range anywhere from the private school having to do particular things or homeschool people having to do particular things or even accept some kind of training on their own to be able to do it.
Well, and then you get people saying, well, okay, homeschooler, I've had this said to me, just don't take the money. And
Mhm.
my argument has been, because we've seen it happen before. I believe it even happened in Sweden. And that's one of the ways they got rid of private education altogether and had a nationalized curriculum is they made all education private, but was
Mhm.
compulsory. So it was like compulsory. You have, the tax money, we give you the money, you pick a school and you go there. But now we need a national curriculum. So everything is standardized. And suddenly you don't need homeschool. You can pick all of these schools. You don't
Yeah.
need to do something separate. So what I worry about with homeschool, what a lot of people worry about is even if we don't take money, and I don't have any money and there's nothing here yet, but right now they're getting ready to pass some kind of school choice, we call opportunity scholarships or whatever in North Carolina. Obviously wouldn't want it. I'm lucky I only have 2 more years of high school for my youngest, but I know there will be people who will rush in to grab at it. There probably will be people who will switch to homeschooling because it's available. They wouldn't have done it before. And then the Department of Public Instruction which is already understaffed for the homeschooling thing, thank God, right? But if they've got all this money to oversee, not only will they have to staff up, but they're not going to want to manage 2 different sets of people. They're
Right.
not going to say, oh, look, 2/3 of the registered homeschoolers in North Carolina are using opportunity scholarship money. We can't keep check. We're just going to send y'all a card.
Yeah.
And we're just dividing it up and you've all registered to homeschool. Here's your allotment. Go use
And to
it.
object to that would be bad economics.
Well, right. Or
You gotta keep things funded.
right. Exactly.
You
They're
want
going to
us
want
to waste government money doing 2 different kind of reports on things? No, we can't do that. We need to consolidate.
right. And even if they don't give us the money by default, they'll make people want to ask for it
Yeah,
because they'll assign the same rules to everybody. They'll have one set of rules and it will make no
right.
sense not to take the money. You're already being held to the rules. We see this now in, I think it was Colorado, but there's lots of states where
Mhm.
people woke up one day, went to their mailbox, and there's a lunch card for their kids for school that they didn't apply for. And then they come to find out, no, no, it's universal food now for everybody. You, don't worry, you don't have to do a thing. You don't have to do anything now. Just use it. And parents are like, I didn't want this. I don't need it. I for any reason, but now here it is.
Yeah.
And you just have to wonder, like, obviously want to keep their budget up. So like, let's just
Mhm.
hand out money. But there will be plenty of parents who say, all right, I'm not making you lunch anymore. Just here, go eat the garbage food full of seed oils and and sugar and high fructose corn syrup. And
Yeah.
what's one more case of diabetes? Um, so I'm be I'm only half kidding actually.
Yeah.
Um, but I do as a homeschooler, I am concerned about that. And then people think I'm a stick in the mud or a spoil sport and you just don't want us to have it. I'm like, no, no, I genuinely want you to have homeschooling. Homeschooling is this uniquely American, wonderful thing that we have
Mhm.
where we can still, we want it back, right? In that little sister's case in Oregon, but we have the right to homeschool our children for now. But there are many people, and we see an article virtually every day from the experts saying that we need to regulate homeschooling more or ban it. And they'll always
Mhm.
cite one little girl in West Virginia was killed by her mother or whatever.
Yeah.
And then just today, I saw another article saying, oh, West Virginia is very upset because a certain percentage of parents didn't turn in their standardized tests on time. They didn't turn in their standardized tests. And of course, what does the article come back to? They might be killing their children
Yeah.
because certainly not doing a standardized test means you're a murderer. And these are proliferating, these articles about these supposedly abusive people only homeschool because they're secretly beating their children. And I don't mean to make light because it obviously has happened. And the best argument against that isn't, well, people get beat up in school too. That's terrible argument. That's not the argument. The argument that somebody made earlier here, which is that in America, you're innocent until proven guilty. You need
Right.
probable cause in order
Yeah.
for you to truly be free. The government doesn't just assume you're all abusive parents and act accordingly,
Yeah. And
right?
that's the thing that is ginned into the system with the we all accepted when we passed the compulsory education laws.
Right.
We gave up implicitly, we gave up that right, and we gave up that solid um, expectation to not be infringed on
Right.
in every aspect of our life
That's right.
when
And
we
this is
passed those
you're gonna
laws.
yep,
It's
Deb,
implicit.
2 lanes is a hassle. They will consolidate just like consolidation of
Yeah,
public school districts. Well, a
yeah,
lot of people don't realize that. When I was growing up, school districts were really small. Like
yeah,
really, really small. And you would have, your one elementary school and your one middle school. I mean, even in the suburbs, right? And
yeah,
then they had these they'd suddenly consolidated and buses started appearing out of nowhere. We used to walk to school, right? Or maybe
yeah,
get a ride. And the only people who took the bus lived at the far edge of the district, maybe. And not all the school that had the bus was like the high school, where like
right,
all the kids in the district went to the one high school, but otherwise, it might be like a couple elementary school. But we didn't ride the bus. We
yeah,
walked because it was in your little neighborhood. This, and I didn't grow up in the town I was in New Jersey. It was not some like little rural town. It was a suburb, a bedroom community for New York City. We walked to school. Now, carpool lane, 17 buses to get to school. The elementary school has, I don't know, 1,000 kids. But I mean, this is crazy.
yeah.
And I don't understand how anybody imagines that children, even with the best intentions, how they think th're going to get anything resembling an education in an environment like that.
Yeah. They're
So,
they're hoping they'll get good grades and get a good job.
well, the what I think people forget, Van, is that the bigger and more consolidated and centralized you make power,
Yeah,
the
and
more
that
you
was good.
well, I was going to say, the more you justify standardizing everything.
Yeah, yeah,
It's too
and
hard to
that was
manage
Cubberley's
any other
idea
way.
at the start. Said we'll build bigger schools and bigger districts, and then we'll start consolidating,
Right.
and we'll put them under another layer of control and so forth.
Well, and the
And it,
irony is then they closed everything down in COVID, and now they've had enrollment go down
mhm,
dramatically, and there are a lot of people panicking
yeah,
because they're realizing they have all this real estate and they have, so that I think we have to remember too that the government is not immune to these forces of I want to stay in business.
right,
Right? There's really no justification for me to stay in business in this district or in this building or whatever, but they will move heaven and earth to figure out, even if they have to move all the kids. I've seen it done in my district where they had, enrollments shifting and so forth. And they just up one day and said, okay, we're now dividing it so that the first through third graders are all going to go to this building. And then the fourth and fifth
yeah,
graders are going to go over to this building. And suddenly parents are like, I got a kid here and I got a kid here and they're like 20 blocks away. Like, where am I supposed to go at the start of the day? How am I getting my
right,
kids to these schools? But it wasn't about the kids and it wasn't about the parents. It was about we can't give up the building and we can't give up
mhm.
we got to spread them out so we can keep this and keep the teachers and all this. And it doesn't make sense if education is your number one goal or helping students succeed or whatever these stated goals are, they will put everything under the sun ahead of that. The bus
Point of
companies'
the
needs,
of a
traffic
public
patterns.
education system is the public part of the educational system, not education.
That's
It
right.
just is from the very start, very first proposal. That's how it works out, and it feeds on itself, and it grows, as it must. There's not a way around it.
Right. Now, this is an interesting question. So, Idiot 47 says, how does a parent who manages to get elected to a school board take any kind of principled stand on policy when the entire structure of the school system is unprincipled to begin with? Wow. Question for the ages.
With great difficulty. Yeah, it's the way when they get onto the school board. Typically, there's a training class they're sent to on what they must accept and respond to coming from the state school board on down and from the superintendent. So they let the school board member know these are the things you can do and these are all the things that you cannot do. And whatever slice of that you manage to take something like a principal position in, that's a tough road to hoe. You
Right.
you are going to be doing a lot more bad sides of the trade-off than the good side.
And
It's
yet,
hard to say.
here we are saying, and you still have to do it, or you still, I wouldn't say
Yeah,
have to, but it's still a good thing to do. I mean, I applaud people who
yeah.
have the emotional stamina
I've
to
I've
do it. I
I've
don't. I'll be the
been
first
out
one to
in
say I
the
don't.
yeah, I've been out in some of our school board elections and, trying to push them along, even though, um, I don't think it can succeed. I don't think it can be fixed. I don't think it can be remedied, but you gotta do your taxation is your representation in what's happening. It is happening in part in your name. And so
That's
you
right.
gotta at least try to do something to rein it in,
And you can't be
as difficult as
bullied
they may be.
if your child isn't in the system or you don't have children.
Mhm.
Okay. You don't let yourself be bullied by people saying, is your child, are you even in this district? You're not even in this district, whatever. Don't just ignore that because
Yeah.
to your point, if you pay taxes, you are paying into that system. You have a stake. We all have skin in this game. And like I said, I applaud people who go and do it. I tend to think, in answer to Idiot's question, I tend to think the best way is to go very well prepared with what you want to say.
Mhm.
Make sure what you want to say aligns with the agenda for the meeting. It's tempting as it is to grandstand or make a speech about just something that's concerning to you or about books in the library and so on. And I'm not saying it's bad to make people aware of what terrible books are in the library. Just understand that the school board doesn't decide that. They
Right.
really don't, unless they're buying the book. It's like on the budget to buy this book. It's
Mhm.
just not it's not their decision. They don't get to walk into the library and pull a book off the shelf, unless they are specifically paying for it. And even if they decide we're not going to pay for it anymore and it needs to be removed, or if they have that kind of authority in a given district, an NGO can come along and donate it. So they just don't have that kind of police power within most
Right.
schools. So better to use your time to look at something like, I'll give you an example. I covered this last week. They're spending a bunch of money on professional development. All the teachers have to go for continuing education and professional
Yeah.
development. They have a budget for that. And they have to pay for it because the public school teachers are requiring them, government's requiring them to get continuing education, can't have them pay out of pocket. Well, if you show up to the meeting where they're going to vote on whether they're going to approve the expenditures for specific trainings, that's a not half bad place to speak out against what the training is.
Mhm.
Okay. First of all, to make other parents aware that they're going for training in how to be an activist, or they're going
Right.
for why the family is a terrible institution training or whatever. And that the $200 plus mileage, or maybe the $2,000 for the conference on communist education in line with UNESCO, whatever the heck the program is that they're going to
Yeah.
give credit for, many of which, by the way, were developed also with federal dollars at a university, or
Yeah.
developed by an NGO that hates you,
Yeah.
and then offered at a cost to the school district as a moneymaker. You can speak out and say, I don't want us spending $10,000 this summer on professional development that doesn't have anything to do with being better teachers
Yeah.
of
And
material.
that's the, I think the one thing that they can do is speak out on what is happening. Try to keep things defined and on an agenda. Um,
Especially when it's
expose
money
the
related, money
Yeah.
related. And
Yeah.
that is where the politics lives. Okay. So the other thing is you can't get the politics out of the teacher's head.
Right.
Right. So what you can do is you can try to put pressure on school boards to hire superintendents who are not ideological. Good luck, but you can try.
Yeah.
You can try to get them to discipline superintendents that are heavily ideological, and fire or
Mhm.
discipline teachers on the basis of disagreement because they don't toe the woke line or whatever. You can put
Yeah.
pressure on that because they do have a say in who they hire for superintendent. Superintendents then hire principals and so on. You can speak out about, like I said, the professional development. You can also go up the food chain to your state board of education and lobby them about what certification requirements include. So if your state board of education is requiring DEI and anti-racist training,
Right.
then you want to go and yell at them and say, no, I want them to speak English properly. I want them to know grammar. I want them to
Right.
actually know how to do math when they're teaching math. So put pressure on them there with your political voice to make sure or if you have a law in the books, as we do in North Carolina, they're supposed to teach cursive, show up in
Mhm.
Raleigh and say, they're not teaching cursive. Can you take away the certificates of the people who are not obeying the law, or can you not renew their certificates, or can you discipline them in some other way? Whatever disciplinary measures you have at your disposal, can you audit them and make sure they're following the law? These are things you can do. It is political, but don't leave your political cards on the table. Like, don't not
Right.
use what you have at your disposal if it's going to be political. And that's
And
how you can make these incremental changes. Maybe,
yeah, and it
perhaps.
can be very, very small things like, the mundane little semantic deception terms that are on the agenda of, we want to promote fairness. You say, okay, what do you mean by fairness? Axing that the Excel student classes for creative writing?
Right.
That how you mean? How did not allow the wiggle words to go through? Just adding a couple more words on there instead of the accepted term. That can make a difference
Yeah, no
in the
word
long
salad.
run.
If you don't understand it, don't
Yeah,
just accept that
don't
someone's smarter than
yeah,
you are. So,
don't
I
sign
mean,
off on the salad.
these are things that I think, and as I said, I think the people, even if you take a voucher, even if you go forward with this, even if you say, I've got to reluctantly support the school choice bills, then you get super active to put guardrails in place and demand that these bills include language that protect your rights, that
Right.
the word yet will have less power.
And one I would, slightly off topic, the um, parental bill of rights things. Stop that.
Yeah, you got to stop that.
We don't have the. If you look at our bill of rights, they're all government shall not do this. They aren't
Right.
saying, hey, you can go out and talk and say things. No, government shall not do this. You put out a school system bill of wrongs. Okay, I'll go for that.
Yeah.
Schools shall not do this. This shall not happen.
Right.
But don't fall for the. All those are ways to expand exactly what you think you're fighting against.
Exactly. And I do want to
Don't
address
buy
this.
it.
Paul Whipple talks about the what's called anti-Semitic bill. He's talking about the bill that was recently passed. It's at the federal level. This is giving guidance. It's a guidance for the Department of Education when they are evaluating anti-discrimination claims. Now, one thing I want to say about this, people have mischaracterized this as it's stifling free speech, et cetera. It's actually not. What it's doing is it's just saying to the Department of Education that if a claim is initiated by a student, it always has to be an issue. The government doesn't initiate these claims. The government isn't coming
Mm,
in and snooping on what you say. In fact, these don't really have any teeth because the student has to be brave enough to say, I'm going to file a claim for discrimination, which rarely happens. And even when it
right.
does, it doesn't make it past the school district because they bully them and browbeat them out of making the claim. So it's very, very rare. Then let's say they do and they bring it and it escalates to the Department of Education as a civil rights matter. Okay.
Mhm.
Then this Department of Education, if you stuck to the sort of old definition of anti-Semitism, it would just be somebody overtly saying something horrible about Jews. But in the modern era, it can be things like, um, a certain kind of bullying or intimidation in the classroom. It can be the teacher refusing to put a map on the wall that includes Israel, or putting a map on the wall that describes all of Israel as Palestine, or saying to calling the Jewish students occupiers and whatever. So it could be the teacher doing it, or it could be the
Mm,
teacher allowing all the students to do it. And obviously, the simple answer is teachers shouldn't allow this and didn't do this, but we're seeing it happen daily. The NEA recently had a big conference meeting, et cetera, and they were teaching the teachers how to make pro-Palestinian activist art with their students. Now,
yeah.
you may be sympathetic to the Palestinians, you may not be able to stand the Israelis, and that's fine. But this would be akin to them teaching them how to make pro-Democrat Party art or
Right.
pro-Russia versus Ukraine art. It's not appropriate. So while our schools are
Political
it's
issue.
well, the schools are political by nature in the sense that
Right.
they're exposed to the political process, but they are not supposed to, we're not supposed to support and condone a
Yeah.
level of politicization. You wouldn't like it, for example, if you wanted to give an equivalent, imagine that in the Civil Rights Act, we were able to clearly define what's anti-Christian discrimination as just an example. And it was not just they say mean things about Jesus or they say mean things about Christian, but we know there's
Yeah.
other ways that people discriminate against Christians. We know there are ways that that teachers, other students can make life a living hell for somebody who's a professing Christian in a classroom. And so the Department of Education, if it gets a complaint and it looks at the language, it's like, I don't know. I'm not really sure what's the current definition. Like, what kinds of behaviors should we consider to be discrimination? So all they did was they updated it for some, like adding some things, double standards, certain kinds of
Mhm.
bullying, whatever. But all it says is you may consider this as well. I have problems with the bill from the standpoint that it's an internationally defined bill. I'd rather Congress do the work and write it down themselves because we
Right.
elect them. That's what they do. You don't go to outside parties on the other side of the ocean and go, hey, divine words for us. That's probably a bad precedent to set. But beyond that, it's much ado about nothing in the sense that PERPA, FERPA, even the Civil Rights Act, they just don't get used as much as you think they do, because at the end of the day, it's a lot of he said, she said, and the vast majority of students and teachers, for that matter, are afraid to complain. They're afraid to file complaints because there's a lot of blowback, and your likelihood of success at the federal department level is almost zero. So a lot of this was politicking. In other words,
Yeah.
Republicans going, we're going to show how very supportive we are. Let's pass a bill. But it's showmanship. It's grandstanding. And, I'm not saying for it, against, et cetera. So I just want to reassure people, this isn't like this horrible censorship speech if you're no longer able to criticize Israel or criticize, a foreign government in the school without getting punished, or no one's going to jail for saying Christ is king. That's not happening. It's not happening. It's not how it works. It doesn't reach down into the school and do anything. And I promise you, if a Jewish student went to the Department of Education and someone said Christ is king, they'd be laughed out of the building. So it's not even happening. Okay. I want to say that because this has been making the rounds. People say they're just outlawed the Bible, and it's like, well, technically, you're not really supposed to have discussions about the Bible in school anyway, so unless it's a Christian school, in which case you're perfectly free to say whatever you want.
The all of these ones that come down to here's our policy on what is going to be said and taught, I think are exploded by the. I've got the link in that post. Gosh, I can't think of her name. The teacher, and she's up in Minnesota, who was talking about the math word problem. So they passed a law, more rigor in math. We have to have 20 minutes of math, and so the math question that everyone looked at on on the tests and on the curriculum sheets of Johnny is going to the amusement park with his parents, and they've been driving 20 minutes. They got 30 minutes to go. How many miles with a standard old train travel kind of question. And everyone goes, yeah, rigor, great. And then the teacher asks the question, hey kids, has everyone been to an amusement park? And someone's hand doesn't go up. And they go, oh, why would some kids not go to amusement park? Then you get into, well, we got one parent, they got two moms, they got two dads, they're too poor, they're all, and should kids be driving to an amusement park for that long? Isn't that wasting the environment? And you can't, if you have to define
privilege to
something
have
educational in the law, it's not going to be educational. It's going to be political.
Well, that's another thing though, that you raise that the UNESCO SDG goals related to education are creating a lot of mandates. Well, I shouldn't say mandates, but if we sign on to them voluntarily, they become mandates. And when you start thinking about the politics of public education or even private education with the public dollars, this is one of those things to keep in mind, is that you want to look for people when you're voting, you want to look for people who reject international edicts and international standards of, standardization with some global standard. This is the United States of America. And in order to really preserve your liberty, we have to look to our Constitution as to what the government's allowed to do and not allowed to do. And if the UNESCO comes in and says, oh, you need to focus on this and focus on that, not only are you violating the Constitution in terms of suddenly you have a national curriculum, all the schools are trying to meet the 2030 agenda global goals. That's pretty close to a national curriculum. And they're doing it now with money. They're bribing the school districts and saying, if you want the money, you'll follow the SDG goals. Well, that's not okay. And so when you are engaged in the political process at the local level or all the way up to national, these are the things that you should be thinking about. Not so much, is there a dirty book in the library, but is there a global agenda being pushed by the federal government with monetary bribes that violate the liberties of all Americans by effectively creating a national curriculum that is not in the best interests of the individual student or the country? So for the greater good, if the greater good is suddenly the global greater good, so even you're not being represented, you're being taxed now without representation, and your children are being indoctrinated without any representation. So the political nature of this is now creeping so far away from you that our forefathers and mothers who dumped tea in the harbor are scratching their heads in heaven or wherever, going, "What is their problem?
Yeah.
Like, what is going? We did worse for tea. Like, what? What's going on here?"
Yeah.
So that's something to pay very close attention to as well. And by the way, this is something Sophie just said. The Department of Ed has to go. I don't know how you feel about this, Van, but that's not enough.
Yeah.
The department
The good.
is the tip of the iceberg. They're just going to move that stuff back to the Health and Human Services and labor. And I will tell you something.
Yeah.
With the community schools that they're now pushing for, with the medical centers and food for everybody and a laundry facility and a counseling center and places for adult education, and it's the
Mapped out by John Dewey in 1909 or 1899, I
yes,
forget
the
which one it
community
was. Yeah.
school was a Dewey
Yeah.
idea. It's not new.
Yeah.
Cardona didn't come up with it. So they are this close to realizing Dewey's fantasy.
Yeah.
And what it does, though, is it creates sustainability for the Department of Education, for education at the federal level, because you say get rid of the Department of Education, like, okay, but it's also a health center. So it's now over in Health and Human Services. Are you going to get rid of Health and Human? I'd like you to, but I mean, are you prepared to also lobby for that? Are you prepared to also get rid of the Department of Labor? Because they also have career and college readiness and adult career training and all these other trainings that fall under education that go with career and business and da da da. So they just shift themselves over to Department of Labor, which is, by the way, where they used to be.
Yeah.
They used to be. And before that, it was the Education Trust. So the Department of Education was just a gift from Jimmy Carter to the teachers unions who helped them get elected so they could have like their what?
Small quibble, although that is
Oh,
all that
okay.
is correct.
Yes.
But the Department of Education wasn't created by Jimmy Carter. It was
No,
raised up to a
that's what I
cabinet level
meant. Yeah,
position.
they
Yeah.
had the Education Trust, and then they called it
Yeah.
something else.
But the Republicans created the Department of Education
Yes.
in 1863-ish with the
Yes.
Morrill Acts.
Yes.
And yeah, under the idea of we have to educate the rebel mind out of the people and get everyone back on track and
Right.
get political control of the people. It is always public education cannot avoid being
Right.
a political
Well,
process.
and let's face it, and even, Teddy Roosevelt, big old progressive,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And so, we have all these
Yeah.
foreigners coming here to our shores, and we got to educate the foreign out of them. And then you have Woodrow Wilson wanting the same thing. I mean, so many of our leaders at the federal level have used education as a means of social engineering and political engineering.
Education is as far as I've been able to find, maybe someone can prove me wrong, but they haven't in 20 years, the first instance of the federal carrot and stick to cause the states to do what they wanted came through education, came through holding out little carrots of we'll give you funding for this agricultural college if you'll do this and that. It's just a fantastic means of growing the tentacles into society
Right.
and
Yeah, Sophie says the
driving it
tentacles
on.
reach all these bureaucracies. And they really just don't they they're just redistribution centers for your money, and they're
Yeah.
regulating, they're regulatory agencies. They just tell people what to do and hold you hostage with money. And it's a rare governor who's going to say, keep your money. We're going to do it our way. That's my dream. My dream is that people will get more politically active at the state level, leverage that
Mhm.
10th Amendment, push their governors or elect governors who are willing to stand up on principle and say, we'll make it work without the federal money, and begin to pull away from this national curriculum. It'll be more locally controlled. Again, I still want to get rid of the compulsory nature. I still would like to
Mhm.
abolish all forms of government run education. But if it's going to exist in the near term for a while, better it be at the state level. better be local? I think. I don't know.
As exceedingly local as you can get it. What we discovered when we attempted to rewrite Missouri's curriculum framework, we rewrote it, and then the Department of Ed rewrote it again. But our state Department of Education in Missouri ran roughshod over the legislature. They made a mockery of them at every step of the process, following the letter of the law as they went.
Right.
They took it over, and to see that from the inside was just something to see.
Well, that's another thing is, and a lot of Americans don't realize this, that every state, I won't say every state, there are a variety of different ways that your state board of education can be composed. So, some all the members are elected. Some of them are, there's so many appointees, there's so many elected, then some are appointed by, the governor, some are chosen by the union. I mean, different states have different ways of doing it to figure out what the composition of your state school board is. But what you can do as well is you can try to lobby your legislature to change that. If you think that the composition of your state Department of Education is working against the voters of the state and working against the kids and the parents and so on, and that is in part because of the political quid pro quo kind of thing that is inherent in the way they're chosen and how they
are
stay.
Like in Missouri's case, where it's written into the state constitution what the education is supposed to be provided for is to make, ruffling the words, but competent citizens who are able to follow the laws and be productive citizens. That's the mandate for the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, which abides by not a single part of it. So we've got right there, we've got something. If people want an issue to go after, you start talking with their state reps and so forth, hold them to what they say they're supposed to be, or unplug them.
That's right.
And keeping in mind, number one, you're violating our rights to begin with. Number two, if you're doing bad, if we're supposed to choose bad and worse, stop giving me worse and give me bad. That's got to be reduced. Make some changes here, and stop deluding ourselves that we're going to be able to say, oh, CRT, no teaching CRT in the classroom. They don't teach CRT. They teach the ideas that it defines. And
it would be better if people
start
said what
looking
they
at it.
wanted them to teach. So, I mean, I've tried to explain this on my channel to people. Instead of going, ban CRT, well, you can't ban ideas, first of all.
Right.
Second of all, it would be much better to say what they have to teach, not what to not teach. Because when they teach in critical theory, sort of in critical pedagogy, they are not teaching American exceptionalism. They are specifically avoiding chronological history. They are specifically avoiding Western civilization. So if instead you tell them you must teach Western Civ and you must teach the total history of slavery, so around the world, okay, it's a lot harder to teach things like 1619 Project and Black Lives Matter in the classroom or whatever, and not have the students go, huh? If they learned anything about Western Civ or anything about the history of the world prior to 1865 or something. And they really don't. They go like, oh, there were Native Americans and then these bad white people came and then the Civil War. It's like they wrote the Declaration, they wrote the Constitution, and then the Civil War. And you're like,
and it's non-sequentially, it jumps around. It's
so if you instead,
it's not educational.
If you go back to what they must teach, and a knowledge-based curriculum where these are the things, minimum, that the kids need to read about and know. Not, got to cover the Declaration. This could be them covering the Declaration. Here it is, kids, in your leisure time, go read it. I mean, so we're getting into the weeds a little bit, but all of this explains that the schools, public education is inherently political. It was from the get-go. It was designed to be that way, to create a different society according to what people, the progressives, wanted. People like Horace Mann and Dewey and Cubberley and so on. The
original replacement theory.
Yes, they wanted us to be not individuals, but part of a collective for the greater good. You're sort of
Right.
like beginnings of socialism. Okay. And that was their fault. They genuinely believe experts could know best for everybody what they needed to
Mhm.
know and what they needed to be able to do. And the thinking was problematic. You probably shouldn't do that. You just stay in your place, little,
Yeah.
peasant. And they got this from Europe. They were very enamored of the European way, which is ironic because we all, left Europe to get away from old world or, authoritarian, aristocratic kind of things. So they fundamentally wanted to replace the idea of America with old
Yeah.
world authoritarian ideas and redistributive economics. So that's been the case since forever. What's tempting now is to get caught up in sort of sexy debates, like I said,
Mhm.
pouring in this and CRT in the classroom, and you get caught up in things that capture your imagination and attention from the news media. But I would encourage people to, when you see something that gets a lot of click, it's like kind of back away from that, because while you're busy worrying about every title on the shelf, that Missouri Board of Education is like, how many different ways can we violate their rights by not teaching them anything useful?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what you have to get active about. And then when it comes to the school choice stuff, just remember what freedom really is, what a
Mhm.
choice really is, involuntary choice versus free choice, and that it's not a solution to take money from the government. And it is from the government, it's not yours. It's
Yeah.
a subsidy. Once it's theirs, it becomes theirs. I mean, once you send it in and it's
Yeah.
not all what you paid, you're getting more, then you have to stay involved in the political process. You can't just make a new switch to a different school and it's all done. I'm away from the politics.
Yeah. You need to be aware of the scope of room you have to operate in, what it is that you can do, what you can't do, and know that.
Yes.
Know that you are not. It is more harmful for you to be deluded into thinking that I just advanced liberty when actually you undermined it.
Yeah, you
Now
did.
maybe this is something that is it's the prudent thing to do. I can't have my kid go into that. I get that completely, understand that. But you need to be aware of that and then try to do at least something to right that situation, even if it's so much as, when you order your Big Mac saying, hey, thank you for that. By the way, compulsory schooling should be ended. Have a nice day. See you later.
That's
So
right.
just get the
And
conversation going. We need to
and
be thinking about it and talking
and
about it.
don't be fooled by the us versus them false dichotomy.
Right.
That's really,
That James and Lindsay had one of those, and I think I linked it in that post about the affordance traps, and
yes.
that is
Can you
Delphi
explain that
is
real
another
briefly
thing
to
that's
people what
like it.
that means?
It's giving you the appearance of a choice that appears to be heads and tails, which is actually driving forward the original position that they wanted to push forward. So that you think that you are heads and tails opposed to this, you're on the same train. You're going exactly where they wanted to do that.
Yeah.
We had DESE, our state board of education, very similar thing when they were pushing through Common Core, uh, calling it the Delphi technique, where they were handing out, the questions that could be asked and positions you could voice your support, which was essentially removing the opposition that they didn't want to face. In most areas that worked, and some areas where we were a little more vocal, it didn't work too well. But
Yeah.
it's there is a lot of power in presenting you with these options, and you're believing that those are the actual options, and it's doing what they said you thought you were choosing from. We
Right.
need to be aware of what's going on, what we're become involved in, and what our
And
kids are getting wrapped up in.
right. And always ask who benefits.
Yes.
It
Pueblo, no.
I hate to sound like a cynic, but I am one. And when a politician, and I don't care what letter he's got after his name or
Yep.
her, and they come to you and tell you how they care about you and they want to help you and they're doing this great thing for you, whatever, your antenna should go up and you should really even be able to point blank ask them what they're getting out of it and why it is. This is what puzzles me. Why are you so passionate about this, Mr. Ms. Representative, when we've just gone how many decades with you not paying any attention to education? Republicans have been like, education, what? Democrats
Yeah.
own that. Like they almost acquiesced, it felt like, for so long, whether it was the teachers unions, or they'd say things like, oh yeah, Common Core, oh, no child left behind. It would always do these big programs, big solutions with testing, accountability,
Yeah.
right? But you never really saw them getting down in the weeds until now. And now suddenly you have the same people who paid virtually no attention at the state level to this issue coming, except for like random merit pay and rigor.
Yeah.
And suddenly, right? Am I wrong?
Yeah.
And
Rigor.
yeah, rigor is like magic. Rigor, it's going to fix everything.
Yeah.
What is rigor? I don't know, but it's important. And and then suddenly it's school choice, and they have 17 arguments why it's fantastic. They have an answer for every challenge, and I've never seen them better prepared to talk about any education topic, with all their sound bites lined up, all
Yeah.
their stuff, books written. Magically in 6 months, a book appears. Mysteriously has red fists on it. Okay.
Mhm.
That seems a little communist, but this gives me pause. You're suddenly very fired up about education.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And especially when, we've had a couple or, state political people who very clearly put out some good, editorials or tweets or whatever on like what CRT is and why that's a problem in schools. And then they're pushing this program that's funding SEL and
Yep.
OBE and it's the same damn thing.
They don't
They're
even know
just
what it is.
distinctions without a difference.
They don't even know what it
Yeah,
is. So they're
yeah,
so fixated on moving the money around
yeah.
and getting people to
They
think they're
they
doing
they
something.
they pass their true false multiple choice tests. I'm certified, I know about what CRT is, and they have no clue where it came from or why or what it's doing and how these other programs
Right.
are part of the same thing.
Right.
And
Yep.
we need to be aware of that.
Right. And then they'll think that it's a bigger deal than an SEL, when in fact SEL is sort of the operating system
Yeah,
and CRT is one of the software
yeah,
programs.
exactly.
As is gender theory, as is the climate stuff, and
Yeah,
these are all sort of software programs, but SEL really rewrites the operating system of your
yeah,
child to be other centric, greater good oriented, global, not
yeah,
national. And I'm not talking national as in like nationalistic. I'm talking about, hey, the United States of America is a unique and exceptional place with a constitution and a Bill of Rights that exists nowhere else on the planet. That is
mm,
kind of different and important. And that when I talk about nationalism, that's what I talk about. I talk about that our documents are fundamentally different. Our rights
right,
are different. And we aren't just another place on the map that votes, that has voting.
right.
And that's what they're teaching our kids, is we're just another democracy. We're a democracy. It's terrifying, actually. I'm gonna not think about it too much, or I'll have nightmares. Um, but what is there anything we didn't cover? I just want to make sure before I let you go, because I feel like you're like prize guest. I don't want to be like, okay, we're done with Van, and I know I'll hang up and be like, oh damn, I forgot.
Again, I think we hit the highlights, the lowlights
The
of
low
what's out
lights.
there. And
So get
I've
active.
got a few things in that article. Yeah.
It's not enough to get rid of the Department of Education. Read the article that I linked in there. I'm gonna drop it in again. Read the article, read the article, read the article. It's so important. It is long. I want to warn you, but it's meaty. Okay, so read it in segments if you have to. Open the links, go to all the links. Familiarize yourself with the history of education. It will all become clear when you do. I
Mhm.
promise. I just got the book that Christine is reading about the was it Bending the Twig?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
that
because I've been
looks.
reading all her excerpts. I'm like,
Yeah,
okay,
I have
now
to.
I have to read the book.
Yeah, that's that looks like a good one.
Yeah.
There is one just to put it out there. It's free online. It was published in late 70s or 80s, called "The Graves of Academy" by Richard Mitchell,
Hmm.
and it is one of the best just overall booms in a fairly slim book. I think I actually have the. Yeah, it's not too big. Oh, these are gonna fall. Yep. Oh, that's the wrong one. Never mind. But yeah,
Okay, I think I
the
found
Graves
it.
of Academy. It's available online and it's really good.
Okay.
And it hits all the things that we don't normally see that are fundamental to the system that we're dealing with.
Yeah, it says that by the underground grammarian Richard Mitchell, The Graves of
Yeah.
Academy. Yeah, it says something like an error. I might have to go to like thrift books and get it. A lot of these books I have to get. Oh no, there it is. Yeah, it gets almost 5 stars there.
Yeah.
So there's so many, there's so many
He
good
was
books.
one of the first academics in 70s or whatever who said, "What is going on here?" And he was by no means conservative, but he was just like analyzing the language of this. This is totalitarian language that we're having to deal with here. And he
Yep,
first saw it in his own college. Then he noticed it was in the school system itself in his
right.
state and wider. And
Well, another
he's a
book I've
character.
been recommending to people who are interested in this topic and just creeping totalitarianism in general, although it might not, you might not see the title and think this is what it is about. But Timothy Sandifer wrote a book called Freedom's Furies or The Furies. Sometimes you see it titled on Amazon both ways. But it's about Isabel Patterson, Rose Wilder Lane, and Ayn
Hmm.
Rand. However, and I think this is one of the problems is people might see that and think, oh, it's just sort of biographical about these three women. No, no, it's so much more. What he does is he gives you the full context of the world in which they lived and wrote and thought and did all their things. And so you understand each of them better and you understand their contributions better. But what I came away with, I thought I knew so much about FDR's presidency. No, I didn't.
Mm,
I thought I knew so much even about Herbert Hoover. I I learned things, I'm reading this book, I'm like, mind blown,
yeah,
mind blown. When you realize that we were this close to our own Mussolini,
yeah,
this close, but for our
yep,
Supreme Court and our Constitution. When you read this book and you realize how much our Constitution, how exceptional America is, and how much it saved us from the brink of true totalitarianism, with people that we were taught in school were heroes. FDR is a
yeah.
hero, isn't he? No, he's a monster. But
No,
this book does a great job of explaining things. And the other creepy thing is as you're reading it, you're like, what time? What year is this?
yeah.
You're like, is this 1932?
It
Because
keeps
I'm
you
feeling like
feeding.
it's 1932.
Yeah,
It's so
rebranded and
creepy.
redistributed.
Absolutely. You could just take today and just put it on then, and it's
Yeah,
so it does two things. It makes you a little scared because we know what came next. Not I'm talking in this country, not Germany.
yeah.
I'm just saying in this country. But even so, we know that we were involved in a world war. So we know that, but also we know that we pushed back. We
Hmm.
did survive. Now, unfortunately, we never fully got rid of all those alphabet agencies.
Right.
Right. So, but that's another great book. So, in addition to these books we're recommending, consider Timothy Sandifer's book. It does cover how and why they, even during this time period, they created the public education system. It talks going back to Wilson, but then what it started to be in FDR's time and what, like Beard, for example, what some of these
Yeah,
people were saying about educating the young. And when you read
yeah,
it in black and white, you're like, oh my God, right? They're
yeah.
Americans just like you and I. So you shouldn't be surprised if you see some person at Harvard say, parents should just not have the right to educate their own children.
Yeah.
par for the course. This is what they were saying then too.
Yeah.
So, you know,
if you want to really ruin an afternoon, go on what is it, the Internet Archive, and just pick a NEA news bulletin from 1933 or 53, and you'll start reading that and say,
yep.
"What?" So yeah.
Yep,
Right out in the
absolutely.
open.
You'll wonder how we got this far. It's really a testament to how amazing the people of this country are and how amazing this country is that we survived
Still
this
here in
long, and
whatever
we're
form
still
we are.
here,
Yeah.
and we still have the little tiny bits of freedom that we have because the tyrants have been there in every generation. They have been very vocal. They have worked very hard. And the only concern I have now is what with the internet and the speed at which their lies can travel now.
Yeah.
Right? We forget we don't have time to get the truth doesn't have time to get its boots on. Truth is asleep. And
Yeah.
the alarm hasn't gone off yet. So that's my concern. So wake up, everybody.
I'm with you.
Anyway, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed having you on. I've enjoyed this conversation. Please come back
I have
anytime.
too, very much. Thank you.
Keep us apprised of what you're writing and doing. Everybody go and check out his blog. It's a blog, Blogodidact. Okay, you can find it if you just search that. I just did Blogodidact and then found it. And if you're watching this on the replay, thank you for watching it. As always, please like, share, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. And I have made a decision recently to stop doing mid-roll ads in my videos. I did the analysis and I want you guys to get the benefit of this content uninterrupted. So I'm not going to put mid-roll ads anymore. But that said, if you are of a mind to throw any support in my general direction, I would greatly appreciate it because every little bit counts and you're supporting my work. So thank you very much in advance. All right, everybody, have a great night and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Good night. Thank you.